She stood in the pouring rain when her mother-in-law kicked her out of the house, calling her trash. Her husband remained silent, and the guests laughed. But no one expected that an hour later, a black Rolls-Royce would pull up at the gate, and her father would get out. Their world collapsed at that moment. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. Naomi Brooks had always known the feeling of being temporary. It clung to her from the very beginning of her life, following her like a persistent shadow. Her earliest memories were not of lullabies or the warm embrace of parents, but of the thin creak of beds in overcrowded foster homes and the smell of disinfectant that never quite left the linoleum floors. She remembered the way social workers would glance at her with distracted professionalism, their clipboards more important than her small hands tugging at their sleeves. Every move meant packing the same few clothes into cardboard boxes, moving from one house to another, leaving behind children she had almost called siblings and caregivers she had almost begun to trust. As she grew older, she learned not to ask why. Some children were placed in homes where they stayed until adulthood, while others, like her, drifted from one temporary station to the next. Naomi became skilled at silence, knowing that drawing attention to herself often led to rejection. Books became her refuge. In every foster home, she would find a corner with a frayed paperback or sneak into libraries where no one cared who her parents were. Stories gave her a world where belonging was possible, where girls who were lost could become heroines and broken beginnings could turn into triumphs. When she was 16, Naomi worked her first job at a grocery store, standing at the register for hours, learning how to smile even when her feet ached and her heart was heavy. She wanted to believe that hard work would earn her a place in the world. There were moments when she dared to imagine a future not defined by her past. Maybe college, maybe a small apartment of her own, maybe one day a family. But even as she dreamed, she carried the weight of knowing she had no roots, no parents to visit on holidays, no family name to protect her. She was alone in the most permanent sense of the word. And then, unexpectedly, life brought her a glimpse of belonging. She met Andrew Hales in the university library, where she worked part-time shelving books. He had arrived with an air of effortless confidence, the kind she had seen only in movies. His laughter echoed easily, and his words carried the assurance of someone who had never been told he did not belong. Naomi remembered being startled when he spoke to her, surprised that his eyes lingered on her face, not out of pity, but with genuine interest. Their first conversations were about books, about simple things that felt safe. She could not quite believe someone like him wanted to know someone like her. Their relationship developed slowly at first, then with an intensity that both frightened and thrilled her. He took her to places she had never been, quiet cafes in the city, concerts where she felt the music in her bones, long drives where he talked about dreams, and she listened, her heart unfolding. For the first time, she began to believe that she might not always be on the outside looking in. When Andrew asked her to marry him, his voice soft and hopeful, she felt a surge of disbelief. She had spent her whole life watching families from a distance, and suddenly, she was being invited to create her own. But Andrew did not come alone. He belonged to the Hales family, a name whispered with reverence in business circles and printed in society columns. They were the kind of family whose home was not just a house, but an institution, a mansion on the hill that stood as a monument to wealth, heritage, and unshakable privilege. Naomi's first visit to that house was like stepping into a world that had existed in parallel to hers, one she had never been meant to enter. Marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, chandeliers scattered light across polished wood, and portraits of ancestors stared down at her with painted disapproval. The Hales family embodied everything she was not: old money, deep connections, an identity rooted in generations. Their gatherings were filled with people who knew each other's names before they were introduced, who carried themselves with a practiced ease that Naomi could not imitate. And at the center of it all was Andrew's mother, Marion Hales. Marion was a woman whose elegance was sharp rather than soft, her words measured but heavy with judgment. From the first handshake, Naomi felt the chill beneath her smile. Marion saw her not as Andrew's chosen partner, but as an interloper, someone who had slipped through a crack and needed to be reminded of her place. Naomi tried, despite the weight of that silent disapproval. She thought that effort might change something, that kindness might soften the edges of rejection. When the invitation came for Marion's 60th birthday celebration, Naomi prepared with a trembling hope that maybe this night would be different. She saved every extra dollar from her paycheck to buy a black dress that shimmered under the light, elegant but modest. She spent hours at the mirror, curling her hair, smoothing her makeup, convincing herself that presentation mattered, that appearance might bridge the gap between worlds. At the salon, she listened to women chatter about vacations and summer houses, wishing she could add her voice without revealing the emptiness of her past. That evening, as Andrew's car wound up the long driveway toward the Hales mansion, Naomi pressed her palms against her knees, steadying herself. The house loomed ahead, its windows glowing like a palace, valet attendants taking cars, and music spilling into the night. It was dazzling, but it was also suffocating. She stepped out of the car and felt the weight of eyes upon her, the subtle tilts of heads, the whispers that carried even when they were hushed. The air smelled of wealth, perfume, polished wood, expensive champagne. Inside, the party unfurled like a carefully choreographed performance. The orchestra played in the background. Servers glided between clusters of guests with trays of sparkling drinks, and laughter rang out in carefully modulated tones. Naomi felt herself shrinking, a single fragile thread in a tapestry woven from silk and gold. She tried to engage in conversation, smiling politely when asked where she had gone to school. She answered truthfully, admitting she had studied at a community college, and watched as their smiles stiffened. When they asked about her family, she hesitated before confessing she had grown up in foster care. That was the moment when their eyes flickered with discomfort, when they excused themselves with murmurs about needing to refresh their drinks. The room became a series of tests, each one reminding her that she did not belong. She laughed at jokes that made no sense, nodded at names she did not recognize, and held her glass as though it were a shield. All the while, she felt the disapproval radiating from Marion, who moved through the crowd with effortless authority, pausing only to glance at Naomi with a look that stripped away her fragile confidence. Andrew tried to offer reassurance with small squeezes of her hand, but she felt him slipping further away, drawn into the gravity of his family's expectations. Naomi's heart ached, but she refused to surrender. She told herself that this was just one evening, that if she endured it, perhaps they would see her for who she was, rather than where she came from. Yet as the night unfolded, the wall seemed to close in tighter, the whispers grew sharper, and the sense of being an imposter became unbearable. She realized that in this house, in this world, she would always be on trial, her worth measured against standards she had never been allowed to reach. And still, she stayed, clinging to hope, unaware that the night was about to unravel in a way she could never have imagined. The music that had filled the grand hall moments earlier seemed to dissolve into silence, as though the room itself had stopped breathing. Naomi stood near the dessert table, trying to disappear into the background, when an elegantly dressed guest brushed past her with deliberate force. The glass of wine in her hand jerked forward, its contents spilling in an arc of deep red, that splattered across Marian Hales's white designer gown. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like a curtain had dropped, leaving Naomi alone in the harsh spotlight of humiliation. Every eye turned to her, watching as the crimson stain spread across Marian's dress like a wound. Naomi's instinct was to fix it. She reached for napkins, her hands trembling, her voice catching in her throat as she tried to apologize. But Marian recoiled as if she were infected, her expression twisting into something that made Naomi's stomach knot. The words that spilled from her mother-in-law's lips were sharp, cold, and calculated, meant not just to wound, but to break. They cut through the silence like a blade, branding Naomi as unworthy, as filth among refinement, as a mistake that should never have crossed their threshold. The guests watched with the avid curiosity of people who secretly enjoyed the downfall of another. Their jeweled faces lit with a cruel fascination. They exchanged glances, whispering behind raised glasses. Naomi felt the weight of their stares pressing into her skin, heavier than the soaking fabric of her dress. She turned desperately to Andrew, her husband, hoping to see anger in his face, hoping for the defense that love should have brought naturally. But Andrew's gaze was fixed on the floor, his hands limp at his sides. His silence echoed louder than any insult, telling her that he would not fight for her, not against his mother, not against the tide of disapproval swelling in the room. Her chest burned, not only with shame but with betrayal. This was the man who had promised her belonging, who had told her she would never be alone again. Yet in the moment when she needed him most, he retreated into the safety of obedience. She realized then that the love she had trusted could be so easily drowned by fear, that the vows they had exchanged held no weight in the fortress of his family's control. Marian did not end her performance there. She ascended a small platform where the orchestra had been playing, commanding the attention of her guests with the authority of a queen holding court. Her voice rang out across the hushed crowd, deliberate and merciless. She declared that her family would no longer be tarnished by Naomi's presence, that some people were born to chaos and disgrace and did not belong among those who had cultivated generations of refinement. She called Naomi an outsider, not just to the family, but to civilized society itself. Each word drove deeper into Naomi's chest, leaving scars she knew would not fade. Andrew's feeble attempt to intervene was drowned by Marian's final decree. She ordered Naomi to leave her house at once. Then, with a sharp snap of her fingers, she summoned security, as if Naomi were a criminal caught trespassing. Two large men in dark suits appeared from the edges of the room, their presence making it clear that the command was not symbolic. The guests parted like water, creating a path for Naomi's expulsion. Her heels struck the marble floor with a hollow rhythm as she was escorted to the door, her humiliation on display for all to see. At the threshold, she heard Marian's voice one last time, rising above the crackle of thunder outside. It was not enough to exile her. Marian wanted to brand her soul. She spoke of place, of how Naomi's belonged not in halls of wealth, but somewhere lower, somewhere forgotten. The doors closed behind her with a thunderous finality, and Naomi found herself thrust into the storm. The rain fell in sheets, cold and punishing, plastering her hair against her head and soaking the fabric of her carefully chosen dress until it clung like a second skin. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the circular driveway in blinding flashes. The expensive shoes she had saved for were already ruined, their delicate straps softening and breaking under the assault of water. Each drop of rain felt like a needle, piercing not just her skin but her spirit. Behind her, the mansion pulsed with light and laughter. Through the tall windows, she could see shadows of people dancing, glasses raised, music resumed, as though her humiliation had been nothing more than an interlude in their evening's entertainment. She imagined Marian retelling the scene with delight, painting herself as the defender of dignities against the encroachment of undeserving blood. She pictured Andrew fading into the background, just as he always did when faced with conflict, pretending it was better to say nothing. Naomi stepped forward into the storm, each movement heavy with despair. The gravel of the driveway shifted beneath her ruined shoes as she made her way toward the long road leading down the hill. The mansion loomed behind her like a fortress, its walls impenetrable, its doors forever closed. She had entered hoping to find acceptance, but she was leaving stripped of everything: her dignity, her marriage, her fragile belief that she could belong in their world. Her tears mingled with the rain, indistinguishable from one another, but she felt them burning all the same. She had endured loneliness before, as a child moving between foster homes, but this was different. This was the loneliness of betrayal, the knowledge that someone she had trusted with her heart had chosen silence over love. She walked faster, the wind tearing at her dress, the cold seeping deep into her bones. Each step took her farther from the false promise of family, closer to the painful truth that she was, once again, utterly alone. The road stretched endlessly ahead, lined with towering trees that groaned under the weight of the storm. Her body trembled, but she pressed on, driven by instinct, by the need to keep moving even when her spirit longed to collapse. She thought of the girl she had once been, sitting in the corners of foster homes, waiting for someone to claim her. Tonight, she was that girl again, cast aside, unwanted, shivering in the dark. She wondered how her life had come to this moment, how the dream of love had twisted into a nightmare of rejection. She had imagined Marion's party as a chance to prove herself, to show that she could stand among them, that her past did not define her worth. Instead, it had become a spectacle of her supposed inferiority, a performance orchestrated to remind her that she would never be one of them. The storm raged on, drenching the earth, the trees, the road, and her broken heart. Each crack of thunder seemed to echo the words Marion had spoken, each flash of lightning illuminating her solitude. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself, as if she could shield her soul from the cold, but nothing could protect her from the truth. She was walking away, not just from a party or a house, but from a marriage, from the illusion that she had finally been chosen for love rather than pity. And yet, even as despair closed around her like the storm, a spark of something else flickered faintly inside. It was not hope, not yet, but a quiet defiance, a whisper in her blood that she had survived worse than this before. She kept walking, unaware that the night was not finished with her. The destiny was already on its way, rolling steadily toward her through the storm. The distant glow of headlights appeared on the road behind her, slicing through the darkness and rain. At first she thought it might be Andrew, overcome with guilt, coming to take her home. But as the vehicle drew closer, she realized it was no ordinary car. Its shape was unmistakable, its presence commanding. A Rolls-Royce, black and gleaming even beneath the torrent, glided silently toward her. Naomi slowed her steps, her breath catching in her throat, unaware that this car carried not another humiliation, but the key to a truth she had long been denied. The night of shame was not over. It was only shifting into something far greater than she could imagine. The storm had swallowed the night, and the road stretching down from the Hales estate seemed endless beneath the heavy curtain of rain. Naomi's body ached from cold, her shoes were ruined, and her heart carried the weight of 1,000 disappointments. She pressed forward, trembling, clutching her arms against herself, as though she could keep the storm outside from seeping into the storm inside. Behind her, the mansion blazed with light, its windows glowing with celebration, as though nothing had happened, as though she had been erased from their world the moment the door slammed shut. The sounds of laughter and music carried faintly through the wind, twisted into cruel echoes that stung her ears. She had never felt so utterly discarded. Then, through the rain, the faint glow of headlights appeared, small at first, but growing steadily brighter. Naomi slowed, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Her first thought, fleeting and desperate, was that Andrew had come for her, that guilt had finally torn him away from his mother's side. But as the vehicle drew nearer, she saw that it was not Andrew's sleek German car. The silhouette was heavier, longer, unmistakably different. The car moved like a shadow with purpose, gliding through the storm, as though the elements themselves bent around it. The closer it came, the more impossible it felt. This was no ordinary vehicle, but a Rolls-Royce, a black phantom, its chrome details gleaming even in the fractured light of lightning. The spirit of ecstasy on its hood caught the storm's glow, a silver guardian piercing the night. The sheer presence of the car was overwhelming. Naomi stopped walking. Her breath caught in her throat as the car pulled up alongside her, its massive wheels slicing through the water pooling on the road. It was not just transportation. It was a declaration of power, of wealth, of another world entirely. The rear window slid down with quiet precision, and in the opening appeared a face Naomi did not recognize, but somehow felt she had seen all her life. A man's deep brown eyes, lined with age and sorrow, locked on hers. His skin was dark like hers, his cheekbones sharp, his presence commanding even in silence. She stumbled back a step, stunned by the uncanny familiarity etched into the lines of his face. The car door opened, and he stepped out into the downpour without hesitation. The rain drenched his expensive suit, but he seemed not to notice. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair touched by silver at the temples. His bearing was dignified, a man accustomed to authority and respect. Yet in his eyes Naomi saw something entirely different. Longing, grief, and a tenderness so raw it disarmed her. She could not speak. She could only stand shivering as the storm raged around them, watching this stranger, who did not feel like a stranger at all. He spoke her name, not her married name, but the one she had carried as a child, the one written in foster care files and whispered by social workers. The sound of it in his voice sent a shock through her chest. Naomi Brooks. He said it as though he had carried it for decades, as though he had never stopped saying it to himself in the quiet hours of night. His voice cracked with emotion, trembling under the weight of years. He told her he had been searching for her for 20 years. Naomi staggered backward, her mind refusing to accept what her heart already sensed. She shook her head, the rain running down her face like tears she could not control. He reached for his pocket and pulled out a weathered photograph encased in plastic to protect it from the elements. Through the shimmer of raindrops, she saw a young woman holding a baby. The woman had her eyes, her smile, her face but younger, full of life. It was like looking into a mirror of what might have been. He said the woman's name was Angela, her mother, gone too soon in a car accident when Naomi had been only 6 months old. The world tilted as he explained how he had been overseas at the time, serving his country, and by the time he returned, the system had taken her, had scattered her into foster homes with the declaration that he had no legal claim. He spoke of court battles, of doors slammed in his face, of the cruel bureaucracy that did not care about love or blood. Yet he had never given up. He had built his empire in the years that followed. Brooks Global, a company whose name Naomi recognized, even through the fog of disbelief. But all the while he had poured money and time into the search for her. Her body trembled not just from the cold, but from the avalanche of truth crashing over her. For so long, she had believed she was unwanted, abandoned by the very people who had given her life. Now, Standing in the storm, she was being told that she had been loved, sought after, fought for, every single day of her existence. The foundation of her identity cracked beneath her feet, and tears mingled with the rain until she could no longer distinguish between them. The man introduced himself as Richard Brooks, her father, and though her mind reeled, her heart knew it was true. The resemblance was undeniable, etched into the contours of their faces, mirrored in the depths of their eyes. The storm howled around them, but in that moment, Naomi felt a quietness, a stillness, as though time itself had paused. He offered her shelter in the Rolls-Royce, urging her to come out of the rain. Hesitant, she stepped toward the car, sliding onto the leather seats that seemed impossibly soft, impossibly warm. The interior smelled faintly of polished wood and leather, a stark contrast to the damp air clinging to her skin. As the door closed behind her, the storm outside muffled into a distant roar, and for the first time in hours, she felt a measure of safety. Richard sat across from her, his expression a mixture of relief and sorrow. He unfolded the story slowly as the car moved through the city, each word reshaping her world. He spoke of Angela's laughter, of the way she had dreamed of becoming a teacher, of the love they had shared and the plans they had made for their child. He showed Naomi videos on his phone, digitized from old recordings, her mother smiling, dancing, holding a baby with eyes identical to hers. Naomi watched in stunned silence, absorbing each image as though she could stitch together the mother she had never known from these fragments. As the car rolled deeper into the city, Naomi felt the storm within her shifting. Grief for the life she had lost mingled with a fragile joy for the life she might have found. Her mind clung to the details, testing them against the years of emptiness she had endured. Could this be real? Could she truly belong to someone who had never stopped searching for her? Richard's voice grew steadier as he described his life since her disappearance. He had built Brooks Global from nothing, carving out a place in an industry that had once dismissed him. His fortune was vast, his influence immeasurable, but his greatest achievement, he said, was finding her at last. Naomi listened, torn between disbelief and the aching desire to believe. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. By the time the Rolls-Royce stopped before a towering skyscraper bearing the name Brooks Global, Naomi's world had been irrevocably altered. Yet even as she gazed up at the building, her mind returned to the mansion on the hill, to the voices that had laughed as she was cast out into the storm. Something inside her had shifted in that moment of revelation. She was no longer the woman who had begged for acceptance at their table. She was someone else now, someone who had discovered her worth, not in their eyes, but in her blood, in her history, in her truth. When Richard asked her what she wanted to do next, she surprised herself. Instead of retreating into the safety of this new discovery, she felt a surge of strength she had never known. She told him she wanted to return to the mansion, not to seek approval, but to show them the truth they had denied. They had called her worthless, had laughed as she was cast into the rain. Now she wanted them to see exactly who they had humiliated. Richard studied her with a glimmer of pride, his lips curving into the faintest of smiles. He agreed, and the Rolls-Royce turned, heading back toward the hill. Following behind were two black SUVs filled with men in tailored suits, lawyers and security, who moved with the precision of people accustomed to protecting power. The storm still raged, but Naomi no longer felt its sting. She was warm inside, alive with the fire of revelation and defiance. As the car climbed the familiar road, she saw the mansion once again looming against the night sky. Lights still blazed from its windows, the party continuing as though her absence had been no more than a forgotten note in a symphony. But this time, Naomi did not approach as an outcast. She approached as the daughter of Richard Brooks, as the woman who had survived every attempt to make her feel small. The Rolls-Royce glided to a stop before the grand entrance, its presence demanding attention, its polished surface gleaming with rain. Naomi took a deep breath, her hand trembling only slightly as she prepared to step out. The moment of reckoning had come. The Rolls-Royce moved with regal calm back up the long driveway, its engine a low purr beneath the roar of the storm. The mansion stood exactly as Naomi had left it, glowing with the warm golden light of chandeliers, music still drifting faintly from within. It was as if her expulsion had been nothing more than a brief interruption, quickly forgotten, the festivities resuming with the ease of people who believed themselves untouchable. Yet everything had changed. Naomi was no longer the woman who had walked down this road alone, drenched and broken. Now she sat beside her father, surrounded by the weight of a truth she had been denied her entire life. The car came to a smooth stop before the grand entrance, its presence impossible to ignore. Behind it, 2 black SUVs pulled in, their headlights slicing through the rain. Men in immaculate suits stepped out with purposeful movements, lawyers and security, whose very silence carried authority. The party inside was about to be disrupted, not by an accident or by whispers of scandal, but by a revelation that would pierce through every layer of pretense these people wrapped themselves in. Naomi inhaled deeply, her chest rising as if to make space for the strength she knew she would need. The driver opened the door, and Richard Brooks stepped out first. Even soaked by the rain, his figure exuded power, the kind that could not be bought with wealth alone. It was the power of survival, of triumph, of a man who had fought battles no one in that mansion could imagine. Naomi followed, her ruined dress clinging to her form, her hair plastered against her face, but her back straight, her gaze unflinching. This was the same dress in which she had been humiliated, but now it no longer symbolized shame. It was the armor of her endurance. The heavy doors opened, and the doorman's eyes widened at the sight of the procession. Within moments, a murmur rippled through the crowd inside as the music faltered, and the guests turned to see who dared intrude upon their carefully curated evening. The sound of rain and footsteps filled the grand hall as Naomi and her father entered, their entourage a living testament to authority. The chandeliers cast a halo of light upon them, and for an instant the room seemed suspended, caught between disbelief and recognition. Marian Hales appeared at the edge of the crowd, still wearing her wine-stained gown, her face tight with irritation that quickly dissolved into something more fragile when her eyes settled on Richard. She opened her mouth to dismiss him, her voice sharp with habit, but the words faltered when whispers rose among her guests. Names carried like sparks. Richard Brooks, Brooks Global, billionaire, empire. Understanding spread through the room like wildfire, and the once smug faces of the guests transformed into pale masks of unease. Andrew pushed through the gathering, his eyes widening when he saw Naomi standing at the center of the hall. For a fleeting second, his lips parted as if to speak, perhaps to explain, perhaps to beg forgiveness. But the weight of Richard's presence smothered his voice before it could find strength. Richard's gaze swept across the room, steady and cold. When he spoke, his voice carried not in volume but in resonance, each word striking like a stone dropped into still water. He recounted what had been done to his daughter, how she had been cast out into the storm, treated as less than human, humiliated in front of people who prided themselves on their refinement. His words did not shout, they judged. He reminded them that dignity was not determined by wealth, that respect was not the privilege of the rich, but the right of every human being. His condemnation did not rise in anger, but pressed down in certainty, leaving the listeners with no escape. Naomi stood beside him, her silence speaking louder than any protest. She watched Marion's face shift from indignation to disbelief to fear. Watched Andrew shrink beneath the weight of his own cowardice. The man who had promised her love had betrayed it with silence, and now his family's world trembled because the truth had arrived in the form of the father she had never known. For the first time that evening, Naomi found her voice not in words, but in clarity. She no longer needed Marion's approval, nor Andrew's apologies, nor the acceptance of guests who had delighted in her humiliation. She realized she had never needed them at all. The ache that had lived in her chest for so long, the hunger to be seen, to be valued, had been fed not by their acceptance, but by the discovery of her true self. Marion tried to stammer apologies, her hands trembling as she reached toward Naomi. She spoke of misunderstanding, of ignorance, of things that might have been different if only she had known. But Naomi understood the truth that her father's words had carved open. If wealth had been the only reason for respect, then these people had never been capable of love in the first place. Respect earned by status was no respect at all. She let Marion's pleas fall into the silence, offering her nothing in return but the certainty of departure. The lawyers stepped forward, their voices calm and precise, as they informed Marion of the legal consequences of her public slander and cruelty. The hall filled with the murmurs of guests, who now looked anywhere but at Naomi, unwilling to meet her eyes, ashamed not because of their cruelty, but because of the power they had failed to recognize. Andrew stood still, his pale face betraying his desperation. He whispered her name, his lips forming words he had never found when she needed them most. But Naomi turned her gaze upon him with a quiet finality. She saw him clearly for the first time, not as the man she had married, but as the boy who had chosen silence when love demanded courage. Richard's hand rested on her shoulder, a gesture of steady reassurance. Together, they turned toward the door, leaving behind the hall that had once been a stage for her humiliation. The storm greeted them again, but now it no longer felt hostile. The rain washed against her skin like a baptism, cleansing the last traces of shame. She walked with her head high, the ruined dress clinging but no longer heavy, each step away from the mansion, a step into the life she was meant to claim. Months passed, and Naomi's world transformed. She moved into a penthouse apartment overlooking the city, its windows offering a view of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. By day, she worked at Brooks Global, learning the rhythms of business, discovering talents within herself she had never been allowed to explore. By night, she sat with her father, sharing stories, piecing together the years they had lost, finding in him not only the family she had been denied, but the recognition of her own worth. The emptiness that had haunted her since childhood began to fill with something steady and unbreakable: belonging. The Hales family attempted to reach her in countless ways. Marion sent flowers, gifts, letters filled with carefully chosen words of regret. Andrew called and texted, his messages alternating between excuses and declarations of love. He even came to her building once, standing at the base of the skyscraper that bore her father's name, but she did not answer. She understood now that love which faltered at the first test was not love at all, and family that demanded submission before respect was no family worth keeping. Naomi had found something greater than their hollow acceptance. She had found herself. The rain that once felt like punishment had become her companion, a reminder of the night everything had changed. She no longer feared storms, for she had walked through one and emerged whole. In the rhythm of the rain on her penthouse windows, she heard not shame, but renewal, not exile, but arrival. She was no longer the girl cast out of a mansion, begging for a place at someone else's table. She was the daughter of Richard Brooks, the woman who had survived the scorn of the privileged and discovered that her worth had never been theirs to measure. Her new path was not about wealth or revenge, but about dignity, belonging, and the knowledge that respect is not granted. It is claimed by those who know who they are. Naomi smiled at her reflection one evening, standing before the tall windows as the storm clouds gathered again over the city. The glass showed her not the frightened, unwanted child she had once been, nor the trembling woman humiliated at a party, but a figure strong and certain, with eyes that mirrored both her mother's and her father's. The storm broke, and the rain streamed down in sheets, but this time it felt like music, like freedom, like the sound of a life finally beginning. She turned from the window and walked into the future, no longer searching for a place to belong. She had already found it. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. Take a moment to explore our other videos for more powerful stories still to come. And don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Some stories are too meaningful to keep to yourself.